He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This one is one of the palatable trees, a common name for its three-finger, and we just won't find the young plants. They get taken out when they're very small. Deer are becoming the filter for what this forest will be in the future. And it's a poorer subset of what is here today.
Kia ora, nau mai haramai ki te ao hurahanga. Hello and welcome to Our Changing World, ko Clackin Canon tēnei. Today we're heading to the south of the South Island to visit the Lens Reserve at Tautuku in the Catlins. It was bought 60 years ago by Forest and Bird with funds left to them by Mrs. Lens. And the reserve is the environmental charity's largest, at 550 hectares. But, like many conservation areas across Aotearoa, the ongoing battle to protect the bush and its native inhabitants is fierce and being fought on multiple fronts.
I got up at 4, I went out, shot deer, and then had breakfast, went out and shot a cat in a cage, and later on this afternoon I'll be doing some blackberry control.
Gavin White lives in Papatowai and works for Forest and Bird doing pest control in the reserve and surrounding areas. It's a glorious spring day and we're on the way into the bush. But first, we've stopped at the top of a rise where there's a viewing spot that looks south down the coast.
We're on Florence Hill, looking down on Tautuku Beach, the Tautuku Peninsula in the distance. At the end of the beach is an estuary that two rivers run into, the Tautuku and the Fleming rivers. And it's the catchment of these two rivers that make up our project area.
So the Lens Forest and Bird Reserve is a small part of the lower catchment in the Fleming Valley, and it's bounded by other larger blocks of Department of Conservation land, thousands of hectares. Along with local community, iwi and dock, Forest and Bird are part of a predator control effort across an area of 6,600 hectares, the Tautuku Ecological Restoration Project. It's not just forest, there are also some shrub-covered clearings that are rich in plant diversity and a few different wetland types, salty down by the estuary and freshwater further up the valley. Close to the coast is podocarp hardwood forest. Healthy podocarp forests are a mixture of the tall podocarps, like rimu, reaching up to the sun, with smaller trees that like the shade below, and then a dense undergrowth of shrubs, tree ferns, and new seedlings and saplings. We're only about 20 metres along the path when Gavin points out the first signs of trouble.
Look at this. Leaf litter on the ground is indicative of possum browsing. Not actually eating the leaves themselves, they're eating this junction point where the stem attaches to the plant.
They're just chewing the junction?
Yeah, most of the nutrient is flown through there, so it's rich in nutrient. And deer, if they come through and eat the leaf litter off the ground, and if they were eating it off the tree, they would eat all the leaves and chew the stem. So you'd end up with a stem stuck to the tree like that.
So you can tell what's been through and munching on things.
Yes.
Based on what you can see.
And video cameras help a lot.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But what's really interesting is where you've got, say, a bare forest floor and then seeing deer coming through with their heads down feeding. And it's like, what are they eating? And then you can see that it's leaf litter, particularly after we've had a strong wind blow through.
And do they also take out, like, baby trees and saplings?
Absolutely. They eat everything that's palatable to them. The first red deer was shot in the neighbouring valley, or that we know, was shot in 1956. And through to the 1970s, it was actually quite difficult to hunt them. They weren't so common that it was a simple matter to go out and shoot a deer. Over the successive decades, the population has built up substantially. Now, they're taking out all of the young plants that are palatable to them, and these bare areas, we shouldn't be able to see the ground so simply as that. And as we walk through the forest this morning, we'll see examples of that.
We're in a patch of bush that backs onto Tautuku Beach. Here the rainforest has colonised the sand dunes and the sound of waves filters through the trees, mixing with the chirping of the birds. It's peaceful and calm, but the scars are there to be seen.
See this patterning on the tree here? That's from the deer chewing the bark off. They're running their teeth down.
Oh yeah, you can see it's stripped. It's kind of like a tiger stripes or something on the bark. And will that kill the tree?
It can do if they get right around it. We can see that the leaves are still green. So I'd say looking at this, it's just been completely encircled. So the fact that the leaves are still green indicate that this has been eaten very recently and it won't survive. You see here how bare the ground is, and it's amazing. It just absolutely shouldn't be like this.
It's just a patch of mud.
And it's not that we're standing in a creek bed or anything. This is really well tracked by animals and constantly picked over.
Deer are the main browsing issue in this patch of forest, says Gavin. But in the next valley and nearby areas, there are also problems with goats and pigs. And the numbers are so great that it's not just a problem for native forest conservation.
There isn't sufficient food for them, so they're using the forest as a dormitory and going out onto the farmland to feed. And that's quite a burden on the farmers because they're feeding this unproductive large population of animals. One red deer is equal to about 2.8 stocking units. So if you've got 20 deer on a paddock at night, that's really impairs the productivity of the farm.
In 2023, the Mātātā Headwaters Catchment Group, which is a farmer-led group based in an area southwest of the Catlins, conducted a study to understand the feral animal problem in their catchment. The estimated cost to farmers in the area of lost feed, pasture damage and greenhouse gas emissions was over $2 million per year. So it's a whole community problem.
Shooting them in this valley, I just create a vacuum, and there's plenty more to come in here, so it's not a long-term solution. We need to be dealing with it over a much wider landscape.
It's that thing of animals don't really see the boundaries that we've set out, really, do they?
No, not at all. And challenging for us is that the Southland and Otago border lies in the middle of the forest. So we've got different jurisdictions. We need a separate entity that draws everyone together and says, hey, we got this habitat. Let's work out a plan to do the best we can for this forest. And in so doing, we'll improve the productivity of our modified landscapes because we need the wealth that farming generates. And if we reduce the pressure on farming that deer and pigs are causing, then we improve the resilience of sheep and beef farming. We improve their profitability.
But of course, it's not just the browsers that Gavin is dealing with. There are also other introduced mammals in the forest that are a danger to the native fauna which have no evolved defences against them. Predators such as rats, stoats and feral cats.
We're going to cut off the track here now, and throughout our project area we've got a number of survey lines where we're monitoring different species. Starting here we've got a survey line for monitoring rodents and mustelids, and we do that every 3 months following DOC standardised protocols for those species. And along this monitoring line, so I put a camera and some food out to see what would happen, who's going to come to this food. And the food I chose to put out was some fish. And we had a cat come through. Obviously I'm wanting to catch that cat, so I've put a cage trap there. The cage is currently tied open, so there's no way that it can accidentally capture the cat. And I'm simply trying to train the cat to go in the cage. Adjacent to that cage trap, I've got a kill trap, just in case it would prefer to go in there. I will see the setup, and I've got a camera to monitor the activity. One of the kill traps I set up somewhere else, the cat came, carefully sniffed it, turned around and sprayed it. And I thought, oh well, I'm not going to be catching the cat by that trap. And I didn't. So I needed to put a cage trap there. And that was up above McLean Falls. It was a half-hour drive from home and a 45-minute walk to the site. So it was quite an investment to catch it.
Yeah, your job is very complicated because you have to approach different animals in different places with different techniques.
Yeah, it's, I guess, the common denominator across all hunting is to learn the behaviour of the target species, to study that animal. And they're all wonderful. They're all absolutely wonderful creatures in their own right. They're sadly in the wrong place here. And the study of them, you really get to enjoy the capacities of that creature.
When we arrive, the kill trap has been left untouched. But the fish from the locked open cage trap has been snaffled. Gavin puts some fresh bait in and sets it this time. Now, while Gavin often works alone in the bush, there are others contracted to help on this project. There are volunteers checking trap lines, and there's other pest control work being carried out by Doc and Hokonui Runanga. And while it is Gavin's focus, he's been doing it for 14 years, so he's efficient at it. It's how best he can help, he says. Killing things is not actually the point. The point is to help the forest and its creatures. Red and yellow-crowned kakariki can still be found here, plus titipaunamu or rifleman. The Tautuku gecko also calls this area home. And in 2017, a freshwater fish survey showed that in the Tautuku and Fleming headwaters, above the natural waterfall barriers that block trout, there are good populations of non-migratory golem galaxids. Plus, some of the wetland areas are home to a secretive small bird.
When you spend time quietly just watching them, they're very characteristic, they're very endearing little birds, and they will come out and look at you, they're curious, and they're a real pleasure to work with.
This is Francesca Cunningham, Conservation Projects Manager for Forest and Bird, looking after the Tautuku Restoration Project. We're sitting at a picnic bench in the Lens Reserve, just by a walking path that runs alongside an old logging tramway.
We're in a little sort of wetland clearing flat, which is the centre of some of our monitoring work, where we monitor the mātātā, the South Island fernbird. Its New Zealand conservation status is at risk declining. We're very lucky here in our Tautuku Restoration Project area, here in the Fleming Valley. There's some really nice wetlands, which are still, in pretty good health comparatively, mainly because the rivers that we're working across, the Fleming and the Tautuku, are pretty special because they're the only remaining rivers on the southeast coast of New Zealand that are still in pretty much entirely native vegetation from their headwaters down to the sea. Considering, of course, that a lot of that forest was cut over until as recently as the 1950s. A lot of it was felled and logged, but it has regenerated predominantly in natives. So there's no intensive land use in the catchments.
And there's somebody else with us here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Nico Jimenez Cunningham. I am 7 years old, about to turn 8 in 7 days.
And Nico, when I showed up, you were looking over at a patch of grass over there. Why were you looking at some grass?
Because that's where the fernbirds have a nest.
It's a family affair today. As Francesca's son Nico fills me in, her partner Jorge has headed deeper into the wetlands to start searching for other mātātā nests. The one we can see from the picnic bench is quite close to the walking path, in some introduced rank grass beside some blackberry bushes. So it's not classic fernbird habitat, but they sometimes make their own rules, says Francesca.
They'll nest anywhere from the ground to about 2 metres height in these wetlands, from what we've found over the last 3 years. And they're very vulnerable to predation. And they're also known to be quite a good indicator species in terms of if you've got effective predator control, they'll do pretty well. They have a very long breeding season. They can start breeding in August and they'll go right through till February. And during that time, even if they successfully raise chicks earlier in the season, they'll often have more clutches throughout the season. And if a nest fails, they'll just continue to try again right through that long period. So if you can reduce the predation pressure, they can produce a large number of chicks each season.
Fernbirds are about sparrow-sized, but a bit more delicate. Their characteristic feature is their long, narrow tail.
So when they fly, their long tail will be hanging down, and they're a beautiful sort of bright, rusty, orange-brown with speckles on them and a paler, buff chest. And they have a very fluty call.
The team has been monitoring this population for 3 seasons now.
The first season we didn't realise, but it was by far the best season for the birds. And we had very high nest success. I think only one nest was predated in that year. And yeah, the wetland just sort of filled up with fernbirds. And then the second and third seasons really were not good for the birds, and we documented much higher predation. The main culprits have been stoats, so we put trail cameras on the nests when we can. It's mainly been stoat predation, and we did have an instance last year as well with feral cat, which unfortunately predated the chicks. At the age these ones are now, they were basically ready to fledge. They were large, they were moving around in the vegetation, but we did document the whole sequence in the night of a feral cat gobbling them up.
Unfortunately, despite their ongoing pest control efforts, the story of predation has continued for this year.
We know of 3 really reliable pairs here in this wetland, and we've got a nest off 2 of them, and unfortunately the third pair, the male appears to have lost his partner, and he's just flying around the periphery of his territory calling and calling and calling without stopping. So whether she was recently predated on an early nest, I'm not sure. Another pair, they got to late incubation, about the time the eggs were due to hatch. They've already been predated by a stoat. I've documented that on trail camera, and the stoat hops along and comes out of the rushes 1 egg at a time. And so we'll be heading there next to see if that pair's on a second nest. And then this pair here, chicks are on the cusp of fledging, will be the next couple of days. And another nest that we had in the wetland upstream should have already fledged. Those chicks were starting to come out of the nest already a week ago.
So how long is it from eggs hatching to fledging?
It's pretty quick. It's about 16 days. So yeah, it doesn't take very long. So it's 15 days incubation, and then just a little bit longer for fledging.
And then you're saying some of the pairs might have a second crack?
Yep. We'd expect them, even the ones that successfully fledge chicks, over the coming week, we'd expect them to be nesting again at least once more, if not more.
All right, so the plan for this afternoon is to try and see whether the pair that the stoat came in and snaffled all the eggs, whether they have made another nest?
Yep. The first thing is to confirm that both the adults survived, because obviously it's even greater concern if an adult gets predated while it's on the nest. And we couldn't tell in that trail camera footage. So yeah, confirm they're both still alive, fingers crossed, and then hopefully find a new nest from them.
Keeping on the path, we stroll past a shed with a tractor and other relics from the sawmill era. But then we diverge, off into the wetland proper. And very quickly, it gets quite squishy. We've headed to the general territorial area for the pair. But through the manuka shrub, we can see a small fernbird flying and calling. Is the fernbird call that one-off kind of high-pitched?
Yep. So that's the male who's lost his female. So he's calling a lot, probably looking for another mate. But they will call in duet. So one will go doodle and the other one goes chick. So he's just half the song. And as you can see, this pair here in the territory we're in, that we presume that they've got a second nest. They're being completely silent.
Yeah, it's unhelpful. They're not the only secretive bird in town. We're just about able to walk around this part of the wetland without disappearing up to our necks in mud. But the wetland extends further up the valley where it becomes even more difficult to move about in.
So a couple of years ago, a project that we're doing in collaboration with Birds New Zealand and supported by the Otago Regional Council, we were putting up acoustic monitors for the mātuku hurepo, the Australasian bittern, which has appeared here. Actually, I flushed one about 50 metres that way a couple of years ago, which was a real surprise. But we're trying to work out, are those resident birds, are those birds passing through? And we were doing an evening listening survey for them, and we didn't find any bittern that night, but we did hear what turned out to be puweta or spotless crake, which was regionally quite a special record for those birds, that species here in this location. And we since did follow-on surveys, and we found that they're pretty much resident throughout the year. But our ability to reliably monitor those birds and the characteristics of that wetland that they're in, which is quite a challenging one to walk through, in addition to being very fragile. We can't monitor let's say, the rarer crakes, but we can probably get an indication of how they're doing from the fernbirds.
While we've been chatting, Francesca's been keeping a watchful eye out for any signs of the pair. But it's Jorge, who pushed a bit deeper in, that comes across them.
It's found the nest. Good news is that both the male and the female survived the stoat attack, and they're on their second nest.
Wait, how do you know that's the same male female?
Because this is their territory.
Wait, so they weren't calling because they were making any nest.
Yeah, well, they're incubating. So the males and females share incubation. They take about half-hour shifts each.
Oh, okay, here.
Well, one sits on the eggs and the other one forages, and then they'll come back.
And so, yeah, it's quite deep and squelchy around here.
It is.
Where is the nest?
If you might want to stand here. And then there's that deep water channel, and there's that clumps, the 3 carrots bushes. And the one at the back's kind of entwined with that coprosmus shrub.
Yeah.
And the nest is woven into that.
Right.
So it's quite different from, the first nest was on much drier ground in a very low clump of rushes, probably about 20 centimetres above the ground, whereas that one's probably about 1.5 metres and it's above water. So fingers crossed it does better.
From her backpack, Francesca takes out the trail camera and hands it to Jorge to set up with a wide view of the nest. The fernbirds swap incubating shifts.
There's a fern.
Yeah, no, they just swapped over.
I can see it.
One went in and one went off.
Do you know who's female and who's male?
No, only when they call. I can't tell them apart.
Trail camera in place, nest GPS marked. There's not much else to do. The birds are best left alone. So we slosh our way back out, past where their first nest, the one that was predated on by the stoat, had been.
It's always a valuable reminder of the reality of the work that we do and why just putting out traps and tallying up the things you catch, it's not really an outcome, because for us, it doesn't matter how many stoats we might catch. If there's still one single stoat in this wetland or one feral cat that's got onto fernbird nests, it could have a real impact on the birds that season. And our challenge is also trying to catch those individuals that are making the damage.
But stoats, like feral cats, are clever and careful and can be very tricky to catch. I visited Tautuku early in the week of the heavy rainfall event that led to flooding in Dunedin, so it's been a while. The update from Francesca is mixed. The nest near the picnic table failed due to the heavy rain. Francesca found the chicks dead in the nest. The nest that Jorge found on the day I visited failed because of stoat predation. Again. But the pair are now on another nest, and on her last check, 2 eggs had hatched with 1 left to go. So hopefully this time it's going to work out for them. And the other hopeful news is that the solitary male who lost his female seems to have found a mate. Francesca saw them foraging together and recently found their nest, with eggs inside. And we know that this kind of breeding success roller coaster is unfolding across the country. for many different species. It's tough work for Gavin and Francesca, engaged in an endless battle, watching nests fail. But they're going to continue to fight for the forest and its inhabitants.
The mature trees are majestic. When they're in flower and in fruit and the sun's on them and all the songbirds are in those trees feeding and chatting away and singing, it's fantastic.
Thanks to Gavin White and Francesca Cunningham of Forest and Bird, and to Nico and Jorge. This episode was produced by me with help from Ellen Rikers and Liz Garton. Sound engineering is by William Saunders and it was recorded with the help of Otago Access Radio. Photos and more information can be found in the web write-up at rnz.co.nz/OCW. If you've got feedback or episode suggestions or just want to say hi, you can email us at ourchangingworld@rnz.co.nz. Te nā koe I whakarongo mai. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Claire Kincannon. Have a great week. Kia pai te wiki.
Of the plants we've got, this one singular plant here is relatively impalatable. It's taste it. It's got a peppery tang to it.
Oh, is this horopito?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a spicy kick.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. We love Mexican food, don't we?
Yeah. I probably bit off a bit more than I should there.
Sorry about that.
No, that's on me. I knew it was coming. Ooh, she's spicy.